Emotional alchemy. So I decided to kind of do a part three of this um, lesson number 7 from the Introduction to Gnosis program, right? Where we were talking about the three brains, the human machine, class number 6, and specifically uh, last week we were focused on the heart because as I mentioned in class number 7, um, we have these three brains, right? The emotional, the intellectual brain, the emotional brain, and the motor, instinctive, and sexual brain, right? And I mentioned that because of the culture in which we live in, we pay more attention to the intellectual brain, right? The everything related with thoughts and ideas, right? And also we pay a lot of attention to obviously the health of the body, right? And we know about how important exercise is and maintaining a good, healthy physical body and so forth, right? And we always when we hear, I'm sure you've heard this always, this thought always saying, the healthy mind, healthy body, right? And so there's always this perception, right, that we are a mind with a physical body, and we know we have emotions, but we tend to look at emotions as something secondary to thoughts, right? And that thoughts create emotions, right? Which is true, but that is an incomplete perception because there are different types of emotions that we experience. And from a Gnostic perspective, we say that there are emotions that are created by the mind, right, by the intellectual center, but there are emotions that we feel that are not created by the mind. Okay, and those we call superior emotions or transcendental emotions. Okay, and so the emotional center has two aspects as we talk about in Gnosis. It has an inferior and a superior aspect. The inferior emotional center, okay, creates what we call positive and negative emotions, and the superior emotional center, or when that superior emotional center is active, we experience what we call superior emotions or transcendental emotions, right? So today, I wanted to take a moment to explore that, to study that a little bit, because it is an important process, or it's important for us to understand, to become literate when it comes to emotions, because it affects or it influences our um, our awakening, right? So um, yeah, so this is why I decided to just do a sort of part 3 and come back to this and talk a little bit about what we call in Gnosis emotional alchemy, right? And so for those of you that are not familiar with the word alchemy, or even if you are, let's just define it so that we're all on the same, right, on the same page. So alchemy, is usually referred to as the science of transmutations, right? It is a science in which we bring different energies, different substances. Those substances are mixed and they create a new substance, right? Of course, alchemy, properly speaking, is the science of transmutations, like I said before. So it's usually related to the coming together or the mixing of two or more elements to create a superior element or a higher element, right? So that's why when we look at uh, when you read about the ancient alchemists, right, there's usually this notion, or it is said that they were trying to transmute lead into gold, right? To transmute base metals into gold, into higher metals, right? And so this is what we are all doing in the spiritual work, right? The spiritual work is a work of transmutation, is a work of transforming or transmuting different elements into higher elements, right? When we were talking about the actually that class that Matteo just brought up, the consciousness, the personality, and the animal ego, in that class, we usually say that what we're trying to accomplish here is to transmute the heavy, dense lead of our human personality and transmute that into the gold of the spirit, right? To create what in Gnosis we call the soul, right? Or the inner, represented by the Christ, right? In all of the different traditions, right? And so in Gnosis, we try to understand emotions and understand and become aware of the importance of the role that they play in our lives, and also to transmute, right, or to practice alchemy in our emotional center, also in the same way that we also have to practice alchemy. We can say intellectual alchemy or mental alchemy, and then even physical alchemy, right? So of course today we're going to focus on that on that aspect of emotional alchemy, right? So that is alchemy. The word alchemy itself comes from uh, an Arabic, they're Arabic words, right? Allah, which means al, sorry, which comes from the word Allah, right, which is their word for God, and chemi, which is chemistry, right? And so it is the chemistry of God. Another translation of alchemy is alchem, which is to fuse or cast a metal, right? And that comes from the Greek tradition. So in other words, again, it's in this last one, it's about bringing two substances together, right, and creating a new one. And alchemy, as far as in relation to the chemistry of God, right, is related to, again, the mixing of and transmutation of our basic energies, of our basic personality, of our basic emotions, and transmute them into something higher, right? Okay, and so the importance of this is stated here, just to give us a bit of an esoteric context, and which has a psychological aspect to this, right? So Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, of Thomas, sorry, the apocryphal Gospel of Thomas, says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you, right? So this is an alchemical esoteric teaching. Obviously, we have something within us that can save us, right? And this is related to, well, it has, we can interpret this teaching in many levels, right? We can apply that thought, that idea, that teaching to in many levels, right? In the level of emotions, we can say that we have emotions within ourselves, okay, that can save us, okay, or bring about this feeling of joy, this feeling of or really of liberation, of freedom, which is what joy is an expression. Joy is an emotion which is felt, right, in part when we feel free, when we feel that we are liberated, right? This is why it's common for someone who enters into deep states of samadhi or deep states of rapture, right, through the practice of devotion, into they experience joy and they experience bliss, and they feel this sense of liberation, right? This is why in Buddhism they talk about liberation a lot, right? They use this word liberation, which is linked or related to illumination, right? Hello, Cindy, welcome. Talking about emotional alchemy tonight. Okay, and so we have these emotions, right, within us that can literally save us, that can literally help us to liberate ourselves from other inferior or from other emotions, right, that we can call in Gnostic terms inferior emotions. And as I'll talk about in a minute, right, and I was describing earlier, negative inferior emotions have two polarities. Inferior emotions can be negative or can be positive, or in other words, can feel pleasant or unpleasant in the body. Okay, and so from a spiritual perspective, positive emotions are those that tend to feel pleasant in the body, and negative emotions are those that tend to feel unpleasant in the body. And it's not that one is good or bad or one is better than the other, okay? They're both considered inferior types of emotions, emotions that are created by the mind, right? And of course, the mind creates these emotions based on what we are interpreting, right? So, because we live in a subjective state most of the time, as we explored in the fifth class, right? We were talking about the consciousness and the personality and the ego. In that class, we said that, or Master Samael teaches that 93 to 95% of our conscious self is actually trapped within the animal ego. So most of our consciousness is actually unconscious, right? So the ego is related to being unconscious. The ego is related to perceiving in a subjective way, right? And so so most of the time we are perceiving the world in a subjective way, and therefore most of the emotions that we experience are subjective, okay? Or, and here's the tricky word, we say that there are real emotions and false emotions, okay? Emotions that are real and emotions that are false, that our mind is simply making up, okay? I'll give you a perfect example, and just so we can understand this a little better, because even though the emotions that we feel are very real, right, when you're experiencing them, right, like for instance fear, when you're feeling fear and you're feeling it in your entire body to the point where your body is paralyzed, right, it is very real. And so it would be hard for us to be open to the idea that in that moment, that emotion is not a real emotion. So what do we mean by that? What we mean by real emotions or false emotions is that false emotions, again, are created by the mind based on a subjective interpretation of what is happening, or we can use subjective or a false interpretation of what's happening, right? I'll give you a perfect example, which I usually give this example, right? You walk into a room, okay, and all of a sudden your senses, your nose picks up the scent of a cologne or a perfume, right? That scent reminds you right away, or triggers in a split of a second, triggers the memory of your ex. Maybe it was it's the same scent, right? And what happens in those couple of seconds, your ex comes to your mind, right? And in that moment, you start to look around right? And then here's what I always like to say, right? Depending on how that relationship ended, you're either going to be scared or you're going to be excited, right? And so, um, then a few moments pass. You know, you look around, you realize, okay, he or she is not there, and then you can come back to your normal state, right? So what happened there? That state that you experienced in that moment was an illusion created by your mind, right? Your subjective unconscious mind did not actually consciously perceived the moment and the reality of the moment, and right away brought this memory from your subconscious, projected it, and tell you, ooh, your ex is here, or your ex could be here, right? And so for those few seconds, your ex is in the room. And so then you emotionally react to that, right? Um, but then were those emotions real in the sense that were they a response to a real event, or were they a response to a false event created by my mind? The latter one, right? And so then that is why we say that false emotions, or we use the term false emotions, right? So we are full of false emotions. We are full of inferior emotions. Some of them are negative, some of them are positive. Okay. And again, negative in the sense that they feel unpleasant, they make you cringe, they make you feel heavy, they make you feel ill, right? And some that even give you a sense of high, right? That give you a sense of temporary pleasure, right? Nevertheless, those are emotions that are being um, created by the mind, right? On the other hand, we have what we call in Gnosis superior emotions, okay? Superior emotions or real emotions come from our highest essence. They come from our being. These are emotions that are usually um, spoken of in the different spiritual texts as love, compassion, right? Joy, um, peace, right? Even humility, which we usually don't think too much as just an emotion, but as a state of being, or a state of perception, but it's an emotion, um, right? And other things like courage, um, and so forth, right? And so they are all synthesized in the one highest emotion, or we can say that all of these emotions that I just described, these superior emotions, come from love, right? And so love is the synthesis, the summum of all emotions. Even, I'm going to say, um, love is the sum of even all of the inferior emotions, because inferior emotions, be them positive or negative, are just um, distortions of love. Hate is just love but distorted or expressed in a um, in a um, in a destructive way, right? And we can say that there are destructive expressions of love and constructive expressions of love, right? Of course, this is just, I'm strictly speaking in human terms now, okay? Because um, love really, or true love, never really destroys, right? Love only nourishes and promotes well-being and joy and happiness and harmony, right? But it is the human sort of expression of love or distortion of love that creates um, that destroys. Okay. Okay, and so let's get back to what Jesus was saying here, right? So if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. We can say that in one element, what he's talking about here is love, okay, which is what we all have, but we don't really feel and express most of the time. Okay, most of the time, human beings are um, experiencing inferior emotions, right? Which do not lead us to self-realization, awakening, or liberation, right? And then he says, if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And so, in another uh, level, we can understand this as, uh, or we can understand this in the way that we have many emotions within ourselves that we also tend to repress, right? Uh, and this is again related to this because we live in this realm of inferior emotions, right? We have been conditioned to um, to believe that there are certain emotions that are unacceptable, and there are some others that are acceptable in society, right? And so we label certain emotions as good and bad. And so those good ones that we consider good, which are usually more of like the positive emotions, right? We allow ourselves to express those emotions. And then the other ones, like for example, anger, right? Lust, um, laziness, right? Vanity. We can tend to hide those emotions or repress them so that others don't see them because that affects my image, my self-image, which is related to my personality, the way that I like to present myself in front of others, right? The personality, as we discussed earlier, from a Gnostic perspective, is a form of expression, right? The personality is not who we are. Personality is just a form of expression, how we express ourselves, right? But who is this me? That is what we call the essence or the consciousness or the soul, right? So we are the consciousness, we are the soul, we are the essence or spirit, which manifests through certain characteristics through a personality, right? And that personality, as we explained before, the personality is formed by imitation. Why we see our parents, we see society, our friends, and we imitate how they act, and we take bits and pieces of them. So I always say that our personality is like a collage of different things that we observe in people and we take in, and then we call ourselves this. I am this, right? I am Christian. I am Colombian, or I was born in Colombia, right? Or I'm American. I am, you know, a skateboarder. I am so, right? So we add all of these things, but that is not who we are. Those are things that we do, that we enjoy doing, that um, places where that we were born and so forth, but that's not who we are, right? We are the essence, we are the consciousness, right? And so then uh, the ego is this conditioning that has been that tells the consciousness what reality is, and then the consciousness acts in opposition to its own true nature. I always describe it that way, right? So the ego is this second nature that we created outside of being, outside of reality, disconnected from our true selves, right? And so then this ego, for example, the ego of vanity, will repress certain emotions or hide certain emotions from the world and show other emotions, right? In an attempt to be perceived as someone beautiful or wonderful or pleasant to be around, right? And so then we have the cases, for instance, of Jekyll and Hyde, right? This doctor who is one being during the day, but then at night he becomes someone else. He becomes a monster, right? And so this is our reality. We're all Jekyll and Hydes because we show this face to the world, and we even believe, right, that we are this good, loving, caring person. But then all of a sudden, right, these negative, um, destructive thoughts and desires, right, emanate from within us, and we are even ashamed of feeling those things and seeing them within us, right? And so we say, no, I can't feel these things. This is bad. This is not good, right? And we even try to pray to God to make those emotions go away or get rid of those emotions, right? But that is all we can even use uh, a religious excuse to get rid of those emotions, right? But that's not the way to properly process these emotions according to Gnosis, right? According to the teachings, what we need to do is to understand why those emotions are arising, right? And what we are trying to feel and compensate through the expression of those emotions, right? That's what's important. We need to understand these things and understand where they're coming from, right? So that we can begin to transmute these emotions, okay? Um, for instance, an example of this, and actually before I say that, let me go back to this. Um, This is why Jesus says, right, that if we don't bring forth what is within us, if we don't bring forth, or in other words, bring light or awareness to these deep, uh, uh, to these emotions that we have that we've been repressing, eventually, right, if you're familiar with the concept of the shadow from Jungian psychology, eventually those things that you're repressing, they're going to come out with full force, right? And so that's why we can't really try to hide or repress them. We have to work through them, transmute them, transform them, right? Okay. Um, how can we find out, understand where are they coming from really? So this is where the practice of deep meditation and self-observation takes us to, right? And this is why we need to learn how to deeply meditate. Okay. Um, so yeah, so to be able to just sit and activate the consciousness. And first, we need to observe, right? That's the first thing that we need to do. Observe. Whenever you experience an emotion, don't try to run away from it. Don't try to get rid of it. What we need to do is to observe the emotion, feel what that emotion feels like physically, emotionally, and even the thoughts that come together with that emotion, right? And you will notice one thing, that emotions, at least inferior emotions, always come and go, no matter what. Eventually, an emotion arises and it recedes, right? And so, one thing that we can do is, and this is part of the alchemy of emotions, is to simply do nothing, which might seem counterproductive, right? Um, but one of the things that we need to do is to see what's arising within you, just observe it, feeling, and just breathe through it and allow it to be, and then allow it to pass. And you'll notice one thing. First, that not every emotion that you're feeling needs to be expressed. Okay? I'm not saying that you have to repress the emotion. What I'm saying is that we don't have to express every single emotion in its raw way, okay? Because for instance, in a given moment, you can experience anger, right? And maybe you are seeing, obviously, an injustice that's happening, right? Which is happening all over the world, all the time, right? And injustice is happening, and so we have two options. One, we feel this anger, and we allow this anger to let me just bring this diagram up again, right? We allow this anger to influence our intellectual center by providing us with ideas, right, that are coming from that negative emotion, and then we express them through the motor center outwardly, right? And so you can see an injustice happening, and your first instinct is to perhaps defend whatever the person that's, or to defend yourself against the injustice through a violent, aggressive act, right? But there is another way, and the other way is to feel that emotion, and since that emotion is already, this is what emotions do, right? Emotions connect you with yourself, with your body, right? Emotions, and especially the more intense the emotion, right, they bring you from your mind into your body, right? And this is one reason why we become addicted to negative emotions too, right? Because there are, again, we can say harmful emotions, destructive emotions, as they talk about in Buddhism, and then there are pleasant emotions, right? We can become addicted to these emotions because they make us feel present. They make us feel that we are embodied, right? Like when you are in a deep state of anger, you feel your body, right? You feel this rush of energy. And in that moment, if you don't actually channel that properly, you can end up hurting someone else and even hurting yourself, right? And so from a Gnostic perspective, emotions are messengers, right? So when you experience fear or a moment in which you experience anger, that's a message that your body is sending, telling you, hey, there is something here that you need to pay attention to, right? And so that anger, for instance, brings your attention, you're observing something, you feel aggravated, and it's inviting you to bring attention to that, right? And to reflect, okay, well, what is it about that particular situation that makes you feel uncomfortable, right? So we can go into that whole rabbit hole, right? Because there could be a genuine reason why you should feel angry, or why you should um, feel that something is not right, okay? But it could also be just a false interpretation of what's happening, right? Someone cuts you off in the highway, you get upset. Why? Well, because there's an ego of pride, right? That first of all, you want to be in that spot. Second of all, obviously you feel angry because this person might cause an accident, right? Might cause you to get into an accident. And so you feel angry about the possibility of that happening in the future, but the reality is that that didn't happen. Yet you're still feeling angry about something that did not happen, right? And so then you get close to the guy's car, and then you flip him off, you curse him, and then the guy follows you to your house. He gets a bat, and then that whole thing escalated, right? This actually happened to a friend. I'm not exaggerating. He didn't even realize that he caught someone, and then when he pulled up to his house, there was this guy that was following him, and he got a bat out of his trunk. He's like, hey man, listen, sorry, like I You know, I didn't realize that I cut you off and, you know, blah, blah. And so that guy, right, could have ended up in jail that night and something worse could have happened just because he did not like, you know, um, something that had happened, right? And again, some things are obviously we have sometimes genuine reasons to be angry and to do something about it, and sometimes we don't. But you know, I'm obviously giving the an exaggerated point there, but this happens to us all the time, even in small instances, right? In small things that we don't realize, or that we don't even pay attention to because we think it doesn't affect us, right? Um, okay, so then so that's where anger can take us, right? Another thing that we can do in that moment, for instance, is um, anger arises. It brings us, it invites us to bring awareness to what's happening, okay? And instead of disconnecting from that person and seeing that person as the enemy, right? I can actually come to the deep realization that maybe that person is in an emergency and it's rushing somewhere, right? They need to get somewhere, okay? But we don't think that, right? And so in that moment, we can say, oh, okay, well, um, then I hope he gets there, right? And then we pray for that person so he gets to wherever he has to go, right? We don't do that. We don't pray to people when they cut us off, right? But why not, right? Why are we discarding that possibility, right? And so in a given moment, or in these instances, if we are conscious, right? If we activate our consciousness and we connect with our being, you can be enlightened as to the reality of that moment and as to the reason for why this person is doing that, right? I mean, maybe this person is just a young kid, right, who just likes to drive fast because that's what kids do. They're exploring life, right? And they're reckless, right? And they don't know any better, right? And so, does getting angry and yelling at the person and lecturing them going to actually help them to bring awareness to any of it? Most likely not, right? And so that's why, even though we will say that in that moment, you most likely have the right to feel angry because there's something that's happening that is reckless. What we can do in that moment is to try to channel or transmute that emotion into a higher emotion like love, which allows us to bring comprehension and be able to relate to that person in a way that can help us to help that can help that person to bring awareness to the situation, right? And for those of you that are parents or teachers, right, you can probably relate to this, right? If you have a child and a child does something, the child doesn't know that it's wrong, you can't yell at the child, right? You can't lecture the child, right? You just have to help him to bring awareness to what he's doing, right? And it's challenging, but the one way to do that is always through love, through compassion, through understanding, right? But it's very hard to do that if we are attached to our anger, if we are attached to all of these negative emotions, right? And so this is where the alchemy of emotions come into place, right? And the science of alchemy tells us that in order to create gold, one needs to start with a little bit of gold, right? So in order to create or to transmute, okay, anger into love, we need to have a tiny bit of love, okay? So, and allow that love, that consciousness to penetrate and to transform what we're feeling, right? And so I describe alchemy as, and also, by the way, alchemy and tantra are literally the same. They're two sciences in which we're doing the same, right? Um, and so imagine alchemy is like cooking, right? That you have these raw materials, right? Rice, beans, and some veggies. Okay, And you can chop those veggies, and you can cook the rice in a pot, and not add any spices or any salt or anything, and then you can eat that, right? And that'll nourish you. Okay. Or you can also add a little bit of salt, a little bit of spices, right? Maybe another ingredient, right, that will help that food taste a little better, and maybe make the food even become healthier by putting in some spices which help with your, in your body. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, but I know that spices have some benefit, right? And so then what have you done? You've transmuted or changed, right, this raw food into something that's of a higher quality, right, of a higher nature, right? And so that is what we can do with our raw emotions, right? We can bring a little bit of love, and love transforms those emotions, and then we use the energy that has been conjured up by those emotions and use them in a creative way, right? So we can use fear, we can use anger, we can even use lust, right, to trigger deeper states of consciousness and to manifest love. Okay. And so that is what we call the alchemy of emotions, or emotional alchemy, right? It is the transformation or transmutation of inferior emotions into higher emotions. And the reason why I use the word transmutation is because to transmute is to transform something into a higher state, right? And that's why I'm not just saying to transform emotions, but to transmute them, right? So the word transmutation is used to express that a substance is being changed into a higher substance. Okay. Okay, and so then yeah, so we have emotions that can take us to really dark places, or we have emotions that can take us to better places, to better communication with others, better connections, and so forth, right? Along with that, of course, getting back to this concept of um, the three brains, right? And I'm going to get back to how we actually do it, okay? But among other things, we can say that the inferior emotional center connects us with the physical body and the physical body, period. And the superior emotions are emotions that connect us with our higher nature, or allows us to experience ourselves beyond the body, okay? That help us to perceive ourselves as not just beings with a physical body, but energetic spiritual beings. Okay. And this is why the cultivation of superior emotions is fundamental, which is why we studied back in class number 2 when we were talking about the 4 ways, right? The practice of devotion, right, or the path of the monk was one of those uh, ways, right, that we all have to practice here and now. So we all have to be a yogi. We all have to learn to be a monk, right, and learn to develop devotion. And we also learn how we need to learn how to be fakirs, right? And that's the way of the balanced man, or that's the 4th way, right? One who uses his intellect, emotion, and motor, or body, right, in a harmonious, conscious way. Okay. And so this is the importance of superior emotions, and why all of the different spiritual traditions tell us that we should exert ourselves in experiencing love, right? And love is always related to God, right? In godly states or divine states. Okay, so the um, uh, as we open our heart and we open ourselves to these superior emotions, we get closer and closer to God, to experiencing God within us, and then as a consequence of that, we have this different perspective of ourselves. We see ourselves as spiritual beings, and we also begin to see others as spiritual beings, right? And it helps us to connect with others, right? When you feel love, you feel connection, right? When you feel inferior emotions, you don't feel connection. You're very much in yourself. And this is why I say that even positive or pleasant emotions are inferior because they connect with your they limit the experience of self. Okay. For instance, when you go and jump on a roller coaster, right? And there's this sense of excitement and adrenaline that's happening, right? You feel very, very in your body, right? But you feel very in your body, meaning very limited within yourself, right? Or limited to yourself, right? And if you observe those emotions, okay, like when you're excited, your nervous system is actually um, too overly excited, right? And you become shaky, your body becomes shaky, right? Adrenaline rushes in, right? And it can help you in a moment to survive, right? But you know what's happening when you're experiencing adrenaline, for instance, is that your blood rushes through to your extremities, right? To your arms and your legs, because your body needs that extra energy to run, to fight, right? Um, but what's happening in that moment is you are leaving your most important organs, which are here in your torso, you're robbing them of that extra blood and energy, right? And so you're literally dying in a way, right? But it's a temporary state which the body can compensate afterwards, right? But if we're in that state constantly, if we are constantly in a state of fight or flight, which we kind of are in this society, right? Always anxious, always fearful, always, um, you know, in that adrenaline rush, you're weakening your immune system for one thing, and you are narrowing your experience of self. Okay, and so this is why devotion is a very important path, which is one of the ways in which we um, this science of emotional alchemy begins. Okay, remember, we cannot transform or transmute, okay, inferior emotions with other inferior emotions, or even with thoughts. And this is, we can get into now like how we actually do this, because whenever you're experiencing an emotion, you can think all you want, but that doesn't change your emotions. You can think all you want as far as trying to transform that emotion, but that emotion is not going away, right? And so something that we talked about um, in when we were talking about the three brains, right? Uh, and we were talking about um, ways in which we can uh, influence our emotions, right? Uh, we said that these three brains influence each other, right? Our emotions influence our mind influence our emotions, and our physical state. Even our instinctive states influence our emotions and our mind, right? And we say, like, when you're hungry, you begin to feel angry, right? Because you don't have food, right? And so we get hangry, right? That's why we have that term, right? And so we see here the physical body and the cravings of the physical body creating emotions, right? Or influencing our emotional center. We have thoughts, right, that influence our emotions, right? You perceive something as negative and then you create a negative emotion, right? And so how can we, so one way in which we can influence and begin to change or transmute these emotions is by, and we talked about this, where is it? Activity and repose at the centers. Yeah. Activating another center. So in a given moment, right? And that's why you'll hear this, right? That if you are aggravated, for instance, if you're anxious, if you're in a state of fear, leave the place where you are and go take a walk, run, exercise, right? Because that exercise, by engaging your motor instinctive center, right, you're taking your mind away from a particular problem, which is generating an emotion, right? In the case of, and I think there was a question here, when I have those negative emotions, I cannot stay calm and do meditation, unfortunately. Yes. For example, being anxious. Sometimes, even sometimes I even don't know what is the real reason for anxiety. Yes. So the way to work with anxiety is not by engaging the intellectual brain and trying to think rationally about what you're feeling. Okay. And this is, I guess, when I said that we have to understand where those emotions are coming from, it's not the job of the mind to understand. This is a matter of revelation. This is a matter of the consciousness. This is why we'll talk about the consciousness. We have to understand what the consciousness really is. Okay. But the consciousness is that inner, we can call it sixth sense, that allows you to, in a moment, just understand or comprehend things. It's a moment in which you go, okay. Which is, as Master Samuel explains, the consciousness is totally independent from mental activity, right? And so again, we have to begin to shift or expand our concepts about how it is that we come to learn and comprehend things. We have this perspective that we only understand things through the intellect, see, but we don't. We comprehend things through the emotional center, through the superior emotional center, through the heart, as we explained last week, through intuition, right? And so the worst thing that you can do, actually, when you're anxious or when you're in fear, is to try to rationalize your way around it. It's not going to work, because it is the mind who is creating this emotional problem, and you're using the mind to, or you're trying to use the mind to get rid of that problem. So it's not going to work. So what we're doing is, or what we recommend doing, is to engage another center, engage another brain. So this is why, for instance, when people are having panic attacks, they tell them to breathe into a bag, right? And so breathing is one thing that we can use to change or transform emotions. Breathing is very, very powerful, okay? And there were studies, which I mentioned last week, right? There have been studies done in which scientists realized that specific ways of breathing create certain types of emotions, okay? And so what they did was, it's very interesting. They brought people into the lab, and they stimulated them emotionally by showing them different movie scenes, right? And so there were certain scenes that were, that stimulated fear, some scenes that stimulated disgust, right? Scenes that stimulated joy, and so forth. So they went through this, right? And as they were doing that, they were taking precise measurements of their chest, their body, and how the person, how their breathing was changed when they received those impressions, right? Then what they did was they brought in a new group of people and they told them to breathe in those very specific ways, right? And the research showed that when they told people to breathe in the way that the people showing fear, right, were breathing, these people described feeling fear. Others described feeling disgust, joy, happiness, and so forth, right? And so that's very interesting, right? Because we can see a direct link here between the way in which we're breathing, our mind, our emotions, and our body. And this is why in yoga, right, the breathing is so important, right? They pay so much attention to the breath. And this is why breath is always the anchor. Breath is always, this is why Jesus says, I am the breath of life. Literally, breath is life, not just in the physical sense that provides you with vitality, but also it provides you with consciousness. So one way in which we can transmute in emotions is through the breath, right? By taking a moment to breathe through what you're feeling, you are literally changing the way that you feel about what you're feeling and what you're experiencing, right? Anxiety, right? Panic. Your body is in a physical state, breathing in a specific state. And so if you change your breathing right away, you will begin to change your emotions and to change your physical reaction. This is a science, okay? This is not just philosophy, right? It's science. And if you try it, it'll work, right? There is a practice, very simple practice that Master Samael gives in the book Introduction to Gnosis, which I recommend you guys read, right? It's a very small book that he wrote. It's called Introduction to Gnosis. And in one of those books, that whole book, he really kind of illustrates the mystery, right, of the we can say the mind over matter, but really what he's trying to show us is the power of consciousness over matter, the power of consciousness over mind and matter, right? And how through our mind, when used consciously, we can shape matter or influence matter, right? In this case, our body, physically, how we are physically feeling, and then our emotions. And one way to do that is, he says, a very simple practice. You can take a moment to breathe in a specific way. Take a moment to breathe, and as you breathe in, you count from 1 to 10, and then you hold the breath for 10 seconds, and then you exhale for 10 seconds, right? So you inhale for 10 seconds, hold the breath for 10 seconds, and you exhale for 10 seconds. And you do that for about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or long enough until you begin to see that your state of being is transformed. Why? Because in that moment, you're actually sending a message to your nervous system to relax. Once your nervous system relaxes, your physical body begins to relax. And then once your physical body begins to relax, you're sending a message to your mind saying, hey, it's okay, right? And then your mind begins to expand, it begins to relax. And that's when the consciousness becomes active. And it is the consciousness, that inner sense, that is able to, in that moment, pick up what we were missing. Because when we are in a problem, as we were talking about when we were talking about the three brains and how to solve problems, when we find ourselves stuck in a problem, our mind is focused on a very narrow perspective, right? We're thinking within a particular box, a particular framework. And it just so happens that the answer may not be right there. The answer may be over here somewhere, right? But if our mind is stuck here, then we cannot see the answer. And so what we need to do is to expand our consciousness, to expand our mind, and then we'll be able to see, oh, it's this over here. And that's where understanding, comprehension happens, and we can then get to the core of where these feelings are coming from, right? And so, as you see, is not an intellectual pursuit to get to the core of why I'm feeling something, but rather it is an opening oneself to receive that truth, right? And this is why in the spiritual traditions, there's always this concept that God reveals to us everything that we need to know, right? That's what we call revelation. That's what the Buddhists call enlightenment, right? Which is just comprehension. And we cannot reach enlightenment or revelation without devotion, without the heart, right? We only perceive God, the being, love, wisdom, through the heart. It's a feeling. God is a matter of feeling, right? And so in those moments, even though it's very hard for you in this, the person direct asking me this particular question, when you have a moment of anxiety, right? It's very hard for you to sit down and meditate and be still, right? What you need to do is practice, and we'll talk about this, right? We actually mentioned this a little bit earlier, but meditation has 6 phases. The first one is asana, which is related to the body, right? And the state of the body and bringing the body to an optimum state of relaxation, which allows us then to open our mind, which you can't do when you're in an anxious state, right? And so this is called the bottom-up approach. There are 2 ways to look to work with emotions: from the mind down or from the body up. Okay, sometimes you can work with the mind, right, and remind yourself, for instance, let's say in a given moment, right, you're experiencing a negative state, you feel sad, you feel upset, and they tell you, right, it's all about perspective. Just open your perspective. It could be worse, right? Remember the blessings that you have in your life right now, right? And so when we put things into perspective, we can use the mind to do this, right? And we can say, for example, oh, I lost $5 today. And you can get hung up on those $5. But then you say, well, I have 1,000 in my bank account. Okay, maybe those $5 are not maybe it doesn't have to be the end of the world, right? I can just let that go. Of course, if you only have $100 in your bank account, or $50, which a lot of people live, right? A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, right? Then every dollar counts, and you're in that mentality, right? But still, you can put things into perspective, right? It's like, so if you lose a quarter, you're not bothered by it, right? Why aren't you bothered when you lose a quarter as opposed to when you lose $50? Well, obviously it's more money, but also because a quarter is insignificant to you because of your relationship to the quarter. But for someone that has less money than you, losing a quarter or $1 is a big deal, right? And so by there's a practice that we can do, and so if you want to take notes, there is a practice of what we call gratitude. Practicing gratitude every morning. You wake up and you take a moment to remember the blessings that you have in your life, right? And to feel gratitude for that, to have a beautiful home, to have food, to have a job, to have a certain amount of money, right? Which are basic things that a lot of people don't have, right? That helps, right? That helps with this process of emotional alchemy. Why? Because you're using the mind to reconnect you with that essence of love, that essence of being. And when that happens, a ray descends, which now mixes with what you're feeling and expands what you're feeling, right? Again, this is why I'm referring alchemy to like cooking, because it's like you have this emotion and you add an ingredient to it and you're changing it, right? You're adding love to it. You're adding peace. You're adding serenity to it, right? This can be this can be done sometimes with the mind, right? A lot of the times, though, this doesn't work. And so what we need to do is we need to get right into the body. We need to get to work with the body, right? We can use we can engage our motor center, right? To um, to take our mind away from where it is and expand it. We can go off to run, play a sport, right? Um, you know, many things, right? And there are many. If you check out the lives of like artists and inventors and all that, you'll notice that a lot of the times they say like they hit this moment where creativity stops. And what do? Right? I was listening to this interview with this musician the other day, and they were like, we were like in the studio, and then we hit this times. We were recording an album. We hit this times, and we just didn't, nothing flowed. And so they put the instruments down. They went to the courtyard and they started playing. They would shoot some hoops, right? Play some basketball for a little bit, come back, and then creativity came forth again, right? Why? Because their mind was like here, like I have to create, and then that pressure, right? And then they took their mind away from that, they come back, and then creativity flows again, right? And you can see this, right? Artists, inventors, Isaac Newton says, he said, truth is the offspring of silence and unbroken meditation, right? So Newton, who we consider the father of modern science, right? And we think of science as a lot of intellectual thinking. He says truth arrives when we are quiet, when we're not intellectually engaged, right? And this is why in the Bible, right, is a powerful passage. It says, be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Once you're still, once everything stops, you will know. Once you stop your mind, once you bring the mind away from thinking, which is another thing that we're going to talk about. There are two states of the mind. One is the projective and one is the receptive element, right? Right now, your mind is in a receptive state listening to what I'm saying, so you're taking information in, right? And then you can project by thinking and then expressing those thoughts, right? But there is that receptive state of the mind, which we can enter into in meditation or when we relax. The mind becomes receptive and receives ideas, receives visions, intuitions, which let you know that everything is going to be okay, right? So those are two ways in which we can work with emotions, right? And we can work with this alchemy of emotions. There's actually a very interesting book which I inspired I took the title from this book. It's called Emotional Alchemy. From the author is Tara Bennett Goldman. Okay, look it up. If you Google emotional alchemy, it'll show up. All right, she was a psychiatrist, and she started implementing the science of mindfulness into with her clients, and she started seeing a lot of wonderful results. So for those of you that are interested in that, she talks about emotional alchemy in this sense, right? But just by just bringing awareness to what you're feeling and just sitting with it there, and you just breathe through it, you will begin to transform the way that you feel, right? And again, this is why I said in the beginning that alchemy happens when we're doing nothing. And this doing nothing means not doing of the mind, but doing from the consciousness, which is to be, right? And this connects us again with the essence of mindfulness, which we'll spend a couple of weeks again later in the next few classes, because mindfulness, properly understood, okay, is the foundation of the alchemy of emotions, okay? Our ability to simply be present with what is, right? And even in quantum physics, they're discovering this, right? Are you familiar with I'll give you some homework, very interesting, the double slit experiment. You familiar with this? Okay, look this up on your time. You can find a YouTube video, the double slit experiment, quantum physics. Oh, I misspelled that. Sorry. I'll send you guys. I'll look something up and I'll send you a video about it. But basically, scientists have discovered that when we enter into the quantum level, the mere fact of observing quantum particles influences their behavior. Okay, so when you look at a photon traveling through space, it acts in a specific way, in a very linear way. When you're not observing it, it acts in different odd ways, right? It's hard to explain just out of the bat, but and we're running out of time, so I'll come back to this. I promise I'll come back to this, but that illustrates the power of awareness. There's also a wonderful movie in which they explain this. Actually, it's called "What the Bleep Do We Know?" You guys know? It's a documentary. It's like a 2-hour documentary. Fascinating stuff. It's on YouTube. I believe it's for free. You can also find it, on many platforms. So I'm giving you guys some good homework here, right? Yeah. So a very simple exercise, right? Any moment in which you're experiencing a negative emotion, take a moment and breathe. Okay. Try not to think much about the problem. Try to forget about the problem, as Master Samael says, and usually these negative emotions are felt because of mental states, right? And just bring yourself back to your breath. Take a deep breath. Exhale. As you do that right away, right, you begin to feel relaxation, right? Do this enough, and I can guarantee you, okay, I can put money on this. If you do this long enough, you will experience a difference. The problem that I see with most students is that they feel these emotions and then they sit for 3 minutes and they breathe and they say, this is not working, and then they'll go and do something else. Sometimes the stronger the emotion, the longer time that you need. Sometimes you need to sit there for an hour and a half breathing. But of course, we don't have an hour and a half. We'd rather go and pop a pill and then get done with it. But what does the pill do? The pill is repressing those emotions, which will eventually come out, right? And that pill has negative consequences in your body, right? What we're talking about here is a natural way. Of course, it takes more work and it takes more time, but ultimately it's healthier and it's better for you, right? And so that's another thing that we have to discuss later. It's this whole thing about convenience, right? We live in this society in which it's all about convenience and instant gratification, right? And we're very, very impatient, right? Which is one of the emotions that we have to work with as well, right? Master Samael used to do this thing where he would go to the post office, and there's always a line at the post office, right? And even back in the day when people were actually writing letters and mailing them, the lines were even longer. And he says that he started doing this practice where he was working with impatient. He would get online, and the moment he would feel himself becoming impatient, he would get off the line and go back again. And he would go back and begin to breathe, right? Until he was able to successfully finish that line without feeling impatient and just feeling peace and serenity, right? What a challenge that would be right now for most of us, right? But that's how you work with it, you know? How do you work with it? You sit there and you feel the emotion and you breathe through it, and guess what? The emotion is going to go away. Eventually it'll go away, right? But, you know, again, and, you know, a lot of people, I always get a lot of people saying, no, that's just, it doesn't work that way. You have to, it has to be more complicated. No, it's simple. It's very simple. And there are people, obviously I know that there are people that have trauma, right? And your brains have been shaped, right? Your amygdala has been, has overgrown in a way, which makes it harder for you to embody yourself and to find that peace and serenity. But you can do it. You can do it. You just have to take one step at a time. And the key here is like when you go to the gym, right? Training. You don't want to start with the most intense feelings and say, okay, I'm going to practice the alchemy of emotions that Christian was talking about. Most likely you're going to fail, right? You have to start with, we have to take baby steps. You don't just go to the gym and take the heaviest, right, weights and start lifting. You start with 20 pounds, 10 pounds, even 20 pounds is too much, right? 5 pounds, right? I obviously I don't go to the gym, so but I did try to go to the gym before. This is one of the things that they taught me. It's like, right, if you know you can bench press 100, you're not going to start with 100. You start with 60, right? And then you work your way up to 100, right? And so forth. That's how we start. So start with the small outbursts of annoyance, of anger, of impatience, right? Someone cut you off, breathe, right? You're running late, breathe, right? I don't know, little things, right? Go like that little by little, and then eventually you'll begin to develop the inner strength to take on these stronger emotions, right? But it begins, and then it's not going to work all the time because you're beginning, and that's okay, right? That's okay. Just know that you're making progress in these aspects of your life. And so take and again, this is why discipline is important and so forth. So take moments during your day where you see like, okay, this little thing annoyed me a little bit. Okay, well, tomorrow when I experience this again, I'm just going to sit there and breathe through it, right? And so breath is life. The other aspect that I wanted to share, of course, and it's important, I didn't want to miss this, is the practice of devotion, the constant practice of connecting with God, connecting with divinity, okay? And this is why, let me share this with you, right? This is a thought here from Swami Sivananda, right? He says, Bhakti, which is devotion, the yoga of devotion, is the easiest way to approach God. Remember, God, love, peace, serenity, all that is good and well-being, right? At Jnana and yoga, there is a risk of failing. Jnana and yoga are the part of yoga related with the intellect, right? But On the path of devotion, there are no risks since God helps the devotee. Those who walk the path of jnana and yoga can become proud of their powers and wisdom. Jnana and yoga are related to working with the chakras and awaken the powers of the soul and all that kind of stuff. But then the question is, who is using those powers? Your ego or your true essence, right? So that's why he says that those that walk the path of jnana and yoga can become proud of their powers and wisdom. The bhaktas, however, right, or devotees, are humble. Humility is the foundation of bhakti and yoga, right? So bhakti, yoga, or devotion connects us with God. And as we connect with God, the more that we feel God, the more that we feel love, right? Then the easier that it is for you to call upon that essence when you find yourself in an inferior emotion, right? So again, like the practice of gratitude, right? If you take a moment in the morning to remember that you have many things to be grateful for and that you have many blessings in your life, by feeling that love, that bliss, that joy, that peace of mind, that serenity, you're going to be able to face the challenges of life in a more calm, serene way, right? Makes sense, right? A child, for instance, that is born and raised in a safe environment, right, is will grow up to be a person that will take risks and be more courageous and not afraid to take risks and challenges, right? And that's where the alchemy of emotion takes us, right? It helps us to transmute our fearful um uh uh what's the word, the opposite of courage. um it's right, it's in the tip of my tongue. uh Cowardice, right? Cowardice, fear, cowardice into courage, right? And courage and peace and serenity and love, right? That is alchemy of emotions. That is emotional alchemy, right? You can train yourself to go from being this this type of being into a superior being, right? Not afraid, right? Loving, compassionate, and so forth. Okay. Continual inner prayer is the incessant effort of the human spirit to reach God, right? Continual inner prayer. And then in this sense, prayer is not necessarily just repeating prayers, but prayer is a state of being, a state of connection with divinity, a state of connection with God, whatever that means to you, right? And so we can say that God is love. And so try to pray or connect with love on a constant basis. And so the more that you welcome love and you have love in your heart, again, that love, that peace, that serenity, that joy will help you to move through life. Okay. Okay, so I'll finish here. I've said a lot. I hope that everything that I'm telling you is helpful and that you are able to get something practical from this. Obviously, there is we will always come back to this, right? These are topics that we're always constantly coming back to, and they will make even more sense, or we'll expand on this as we in the next block of the program where we talk about the consciousness and so forth. Okay, and um, as you connect deeper with the science of meditation and you connect deeper with the state of meditation, you will begin to feel more and understand more how to bring that into your daily life, right? That's why the more that you meditate, the more conscious that you are during the day, and um, and why meditation is linked with mindfulness, right? The more that you meditate, the more mindful that you will be. And the more mindful that you are during the day, it'll also influence your meditation. So they go hand in hand, right? I have a question here. Are you familiar with Ho'oponopono? If yes, what do you think about that? That sounds familiar. But no, I guess not. You would have to, if you want to turn your microphone on, Farah, and explain what you mean by that. No? Okay, we'll let it go then.
Hi, sorry about
Hey,
that.
all right.
Hi. I think it takes time. Maybe we can do that. I mean, in next session, I can explain. Ho'oponopono is a Hawaiian term. It's a kind of, it's hard to explain now. I have to be ready, but but it takes time. I think if you want to do the, especially if you want to do the meditation now, I can, I mean, share some information in our next session.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, let's do, I definitely want to make time to do a meditation. If you guys have time for meditation, you can hang out. But yeah, all right. Well, I'll let you explain it to me next time then.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, yeah. Or I'm actually gonna look that. Let me just copy that and look into it. Sure, I'm sure there's gonna be a video or something online. Okay, so yeah, how about we do a practice, and then if there are any questions or comments, we can do it after, okay? Just so that we can have time to do a practice.